remember yesterday we said in order to factor and solve for our zeros, the first thing we had to do is make sure everything was on one side of the equal sign and it was set equal to what? 0. Right. So right now, s squared is on the side that I want it to be on, but those other two pieces aren't. So how could I move them to the other side? I'll subtract the 18s. What about the negative 81? I'll have to add. All right, so I'm subtracting 18s over here, adding the 81. But none of those three things are like terms, right? So I can't actually put them together. So I'm going to have the s squared minus the 18s plus the 81 equals 0. Okay, so now we have it set equal to 0. After we set it equal to 0, now we can try and factor. Lene, open the door, please. All right, so whenever we factor, what do we look for first? A GCF. Does this one have a GCF? No GCF. Okay. Then we identify S and P, sum and product. What's my S? The negative 18, and what's P? 81. All right. So what can you guys think of that multiplies to give us 81? 9 and 9. So 9 times 9 will give me 81, but I need to be able to add those two and get negative 18. Very good. If I make them both negatives, a negative times a negative will give me positive 81, and negative 9 plus negative 9 is negative 18. Good. So I'll have s minus 9 and s minus 9. All right, after we find our factors, what do I do with what's inside the parentheses? I take it out and set it equal to 0. Good. So I'm going to have s minus 9 equals 0 and s minus 9 equals 0. So how do we solve for s? Add it. And what is 0 plus 9? 9. And I'm going to get the exact same thing for this one, right? So I end up with s is 9 for both of my answers. So it turns out we get really just one answer, right? Because they're the same. Okay? So if this is a 0, that's the same thing as, remember, an x-intercept, a solution, and a root. All those mean the same thing. Where do we find those on a graph? Where do I find an x-intercept? On the x-axis. So it's going to be on this line at, where did we say it was? 9. Okay. So I put myself a point at 9. Okay. And then remember, to determine if it points up or down, I look in front of the first term. If it's positive, it points up. If it's negative, it points down. So we have an up. Okay. And this is the only 0, and it's pointing up. So it has to go up in both directions to make my U shape. Okay. Number 2. So the first thing we do is make sure it's set equal to 0. And is this one that way? Okay, so we're good there. So now we factor. So what do we look for first when we factor? GCF. Does this have one? Yeah, what's our GCF? Good. All right, so I got a GCF of 3. All right, so these 3's will divide out, right? And I'm going to be left with just the r squared. And what's negative 12 divided by 3? Good. All right. So now that we have it written this way, I look for s and p. Where is s supposed to be? In the middle. Is there anything there? So what does it have to be? 0. And what's p? Good. All right, what multiplies to give me negative 4 and adds to give me 0? There we go. All right, so now I make my factors. We have that GCF of 3. We bring that down. And I'll have r minus 2 and r plus 2. All right, and then to solve, what do I have to do with all those factors? Equals 0. So I've got 3 equals 0, r minus 2 equals 0, and r plus 2 equals 0. Okay, so there's no r to solve for here, and does 3 equal 0? So we can't use that. All right, for the next one, what am I going to do to solve? Add 2. And what is 0 plus 2? Good. All right, for the next one, what am I going to have to do? Subtract. And what is 0 minus 2? All right. So this time we got that both of our zeros are different, right? They're not the same like last time. We've got a 2 and a negative 2. And where am I going to put those on the graph? X-axis. So here's my x-axis. I'm going to put a spot at negative 2 and a spot at positive 2. All right. And remember, the way we decide if it points up or down, we look at our function when it was set equal to 0. That's what I had up here. Looking at that number, does it point up or down? Oh, thank you. Does it point up or down? Up. All right. And it has to go through both of those points, right? So it goes up from this point and up from this point. And if I want it to make a U shape, I need to connect those points, right? Okay. Okay, so number 3, we've got our function here. They say f of x equals negative parenthesis 2x plus 5 and a parenthesis x plus 7. And then is there any other part of the equation on the other side of the equal sign? No. So I can go ahead and say that it equals 0. All right. Next, we would factor. But do we need to factor, or is it already done? Already done. We've already got our 2 parentheses. Okay? So then what do I do with my parentheses? Equals 0. So inside of this parenthesis, I have 2x plus 5 equals 0. And in my other one, I have x plus 7 equals 0. Okay? And if you want to, all that's out in front is a minus, right? That's a secret what? 1. We also could say that our negative 1 equals 0, but since negative 1 doesn't equal 0, we aren't going to use it, right? Okay, so I go to solve. What am I going to move first for this one? How am I going to move it? And what is 0 minus 5? Negative 5. But I'm not done yet. I got to get rid of that 2. How am I going to do that? Divide by 2. What is negative 5 divided by 2? Negative 2.5. All right, for this one over here, how am I going to solve? Subtract 7. So we get x equals negative 7. All right, and if those are my 2 x-intercepts, where am I going to put them at? X-axis. All right, so I've got 1 at negative 7 and 1 at negative 2.5. So right there in the middle of 2 and 3. All right, and the way we decide if it points up or down is we look at the very front of the equation. What do we have at the front? The negative, so this one's going to point down. Okay, so from both of these points, I'm pointing down, and I have to connect them in the middle to make that U shape, right? So it's got to be something like this, so that it connects to make that U shape. All right. Okay, so we've practiced graphing them and what they look like. Flip it over onto the back, and these are more like what we saw yesterday. They just want us to find the zeros. We don't have to graph it. Okay. So on number 4, are all the x's all on the same side? Yeah, all the x's are on the same side. Okay, so I can say that 24x squared minus 8x equals 0. There's not anything over here I have to move, right? Okay, so it's equal to 0. Now what do I do? Factor it. And what do we look for first? GCF. Alright, so I'm looking for a GCF between 24x squared and negative 8x. So what's the biggest number that's going to go into 24 and 8? 8. And they also both have a what? An x. So I can take out an 8x. So I'm going to divide both of these pieces by 8x. Okay? So we got our 8x GCF out in front. What is 24 divided by 8? 3. Very good. Okay, and it was an x squared, but we took out one of the x's, so how many x's are left? Just one. Okay, what's negative 8 divided by 8? Negative 1, right? And I took out the x, so is there any more x's? Okay. Alright, so do we have any x squareds left? No, so we don't have to factor, we're done. Now that I have my factors, I take them and set them equal to 0. So I have 8x equals 0 and 3x minus 1 equals 0. Alright, so if I want to get x by itself, how do we get rid of that 8? We what? Divide. And what is 0 divided by 8? Very good. Alright, for that other equation, what are we going to do? Add 1, and then divide by 3. Good. So 3x equals 1, and we divide by 3. So x equals 1/3. So x equals 0 and x equals 1/3 are our two answers. Okay? Alright, number 5. On that one, do we have everything on the same side of the equation? No. So what are we going to move? The what? 156? Okay, how am I going to move 156? Subtract it, okay. So I subtract 156 from both sides, so now that's gone. I've got negative 2n squared minus 38n minus 156 is now equal to 0. We got it all on the same side. Okay, so now we factor. I'll look for a GCF. Okay, so what's the biggest thing that goes into negative 2, negative 38, and negative 156? Negative 2, right? Okay, so I'm going to pull out a negative 2. I'm dividing everything by negative 2. Okay, so I've got negative 2 n squared. What's negative 38 divided by negative 2? Negative 38 divided by negative 2, what is it? 19. So 19n, oops, n, not n. And what's negative 156 divided by negative 2? Good. Alright. So now that we have taken out the GCF, what's our S? Good. And what's P? 78. Alright, so now we're looking for something that multiplies to give us 78, but also adds to give us 19. So check your factors in your calculator, see what numbers we can come up with. Very good. Okay, 6 times 13 is 78. 6 plus 13 is 19. Good. So we got negative 2 times n plus 6 times n plus 13. And then what do we do with those factors? Equals 0. So I got negative 2 equals 0, n plus 6 equals 0, and n plus 13 equals 0. Well, does negative 2 equal 0? So we don't use that one. How are we going to solve that next one? So we get n equals, good. And then for the last one, and we end up getting, good. So here's our two answers, negative 6 and negative 13. All right, last one says that the area of a rectangular room is given by this equation where L is the length of the room and they want us to find L. So we're going to have to factor it just like these others. So right now, my equation is L squared minus 5L equals 66. What am I going to have to do to fix that equation? Very good. So I subtract 66 from both sides. And now I'm going to have everything in the right order. So I'll have L squared minus 5L minus 66 equals 0. All right. So now we factor. We look for a what first? A GCF. Do we have one here? No GCF. Okay. So what's my S? Negative 5. And what's my P? Negative 66. All right, so what multiplies to give us 66? 11 times 6, okay? But if it's going to give me a negative 66, one of them has to be negative, and it is going to be the 11. Negative 11 plus 6 will give us negative 5. All right, so for my factors, I have plus u. L minus 11 and L plus 6. Okay. So what do I do with my two factors? We are going to add after we set them equal to 0. So L minus 11 equals 0, and L plus 6 equals 0. So we add the 11, So we end up with L equals 11, and over here we're going to minus. So L is negative 6. All right, it said to find the length. That means there's only one length, right? But we just came up with two answers. It's got to be the 11. Why? Right, you can't have negative length, so it would have to be the positive one. Very good. Good job.